Action, and then some fun ones. Wear a raincoat. Control flooding, greenhouse gas emissions, clean air, flood resiliency flooding. Number of these. Cost savings, infrastructure. Great. So you all get the point. You get the point that climate planning encompasses all of these things and so much more. There's really not, one thing that a climate action plan is trying to do. Probably more like a few things. Let's see. I think we do have one more. Yeah, one more time. This is even more helpful for us on the CAFE team. If you would enter another code. Not sure if you can see it, but it's 848502 or wait, 0724. I think that's the same code. Okay. So do you see this ranking option that popped up for you? Okay, good. So what do you hope to get out of CAFE is the next question, and this is a ranked list. So just pull your number one choice to the top, the thing you care about the least to the bottom. We'll get a sense of what brought everyone here today, besides probably committing to do this 3.5 years ago or something. Awesome. Great. I'm surprised, actually. Okay. Let's talk about these results. I said I was surprised because you all are here for the name of the game, which is to reduce emissions first and foremost. Whenever I play this game with other communities, it's usually always to save money, understandably, or to access some grant funding. Those are all ranking high. But for you all, emissions reduction is really what brought you here. Anyone want to give comment on this, why you answered the way you did? Yeah, Vanessa.
We were also just saying we're really looking forward to having the data and the clarity to help our decision making.
Great. Yes, that is the place we will begin in the process for sure. The greenhouse gas inventory. Anyone else? What brought you here, or are you surprised by this list? All right. Well, even though today is kind of this high-level overview day, this introduction, we actually have a ton of ground to cover, which might be indicative of our entire 16 months together. But we all came here to reduce emissions, so we're motivated, and we're doing this as a team. My name is Kale, just like the vegetables, spelled like that and everything. I'm with an organization called ICLE, Local Governments for Sustainability. I live not too far away, but in Putnam County. But I came here in 2013 to attend BARD and get my master's degree in climate policy, and fell in love with Dutchess County. In fact, it's my favorite county in all of New York. I would live up here if my partner wasn't an English teacher in Ossining at the high school there, so it's like a little too far to commute. But never thought, I'd be coming full circle here, getting to work so closely with my favorite communities in the state on the climate, on this climate work. You all in this region truly is a leader in climate action planning. I'm not just saying that. ICLE is a national organization, actually international, and works with thousands of cities around the world. Hundreds in the United States, and right here in the Hudson Valley is a hotbed for climate action. Developed some of the first greenhouse gas inventories in the United States back like 15, 20 years ago. Has some of the most climate action plans in a kind of a small area of anywhere in the United States, including California, which has some really advanced requirements around climate planning. So just all to say, you all have been at this kind of vanguard of this type of work, and the work you're doing continues to be that. What Carla was saying was really inspiring. This is the largest coalition of communities that have come together in this kind of work that DEC is seeing. So really setting a model for the state, for the region, and working with ICLEI, sharing that kind of leadership with the rest of the country. So let me tell you a little bit, since we're going to have to be best friends here for the next 6 months, a little bit about this funny name organization. Let's see if I can advance. All right. So ICLEI is a nonprofit. We partner with local governments. We're established for and by cities, towns, counties to work on sustainability. Getting our start back in the 1990s when a global environmental problem was affecting our planet. And can anyone recognize what the big deal problem was at the time? Just call it out.
Ozone.
Yep, it was the hole in the ozone layer. And the United Nations and countries were coming together to say, hey, oh my gosh, the data, the science is showing that this is happening. It's going to mean terrible things for our health. Presidents, prime ministers need to do something about this. So they got together in New York, but they were not the only ones that went to the UN. Mayors and council members, uninvited, decided, yeah, that's great that nations want to take action on the hole in the ozone, but the solutions will happen at the ground level in cities and towns. So we have a role to play. So this kind of like motley crew of mayors and council members from across the U.S., including a county commissioner of Westchester back in 1990, went to the UN and said, hey, we're here and we're going to take action on this issue. And that motley crew came to be called the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, or ICLEI. So that's how the organization got its start, and has this rich beginnings and history that carry forward to today as a proper 501c3 nonprofit that serves as the focal organization to the UN on cities and climate, also cities and nature. So you all, are engaged in this collective effort to do something big to solve the climate crisis. And I couldn't be happier, to be here and be part of this kind of leadership that you're showing. Here at ICLEI, we work through these 5 pathways, just so you know a little more about our organization. Most of our work together will be in this first one here, this low emissions pathway, more and more no emissions pathway, or carbon neutrality. But we also work on nature, equity, resilience, and circular economy. Some of those pieces of the other pathways, no doubt, will show up in the climate action plans that you all put together, and priority activities and measures that you want to include in the plan. This is a map of the ICLEI members around the country. I just have to show you that there's strong leadership for years and years in the ICLEI network. Sure, Chicago region is great, but that's a lot of big cities. Really, like lots of industry and really population, lots of money in those regions. We're here in the Hudson Valley, a lot of rural communities, small towns taking on this work that has only been done by big cities for much of climate history. And it couldn't be more important of a time for us to be doing this, right? The Paris Agreement calls on the world to limit warming to no more than 2 degrees Celsius. I really appreciate the work that its Climate Tracker is the name of this organization does to show the difference in impact from climate change for like every half of the degree. And the new like impetus on all of this is to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. So well under 2 degrees Celsius is what you'll often hear. And this is why. Because at 1.5 degrees, global population and populations locally too, exposed to high heat events, heat waves, longer duration of heat, is at 14% of the population globally. And those figures do kind of match up with what we see here in Hudson Valley too. At 2 degrees, a third of humanity is suffering from high heat events, in some parts of the world, completely unlivable conditions, really terrible. Again, looking at corn, because it's kind of like a proxy to food systems at large, at 1.5 degrees, a decrease in yields for corn at 3%, looking more 7%, and actually the latest figures is more like 10% corn yields. And corn's a pretty, like, some strains drought and heat resistant crop. So lots of other vegetables that we eat, and then corn, of course, livestock's eating, really devastating to the yields and causing all kinds of food crises. Sea level rise, impacts to coral, etc. Just so much worse. Orders of magnitude worse between 1.5 and 2 degrees. The takeaway from this is every degree matters. Actually, every half a degree matters. And you all know this.
Is this the other week?
I don't think it's the other week, but it's from several years ago.
I have an update for you.
And, okay, yeah. Did this have been taken the other week?
Yes.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. So some of you are here for the climate adaptation component. That will start, hopefully not too much later. And we'll talk a lot more about projected impacts, like actually look at the data to see how much more frequently these kinds of events are set to transpire. The only takeaway from this slide is that the world's not on track. This is pre-industrial levels. Down here, if the Paris Agreement's best case scenario were met, 1.3 degrees of warming. Where we're at currently is on track for 3 degrees of warming. So we saw the impacts at 2 degrees. I'm sure there's a diagram that shows like who the coral is gone and all the rest. It's a little too depressing, but that's where we're on course for. But there's momentum globally and here at home to turn that ship around. This story is not over. It's not ended. It's not too late to turn things around. And I say that because last year at the climate conference, you hear about these COPs that the UN has, like COP26 and COP27. Some 97 nations have pledged climate neutrality by 2050, which is what it would take to cap warming at 2 degrees. So the momentum is turning around. Not fast enough. Every year matters. And so the work we're doing, it really does have an impact, especially if we're going to be a model to serve for the rest of the state and the country. Meanwhile, New York as a state is leading. You all will know about the Climate Act, a lot of the goals that are called out there, including moving toward carbon neutrality by the middle of the century. When we say that, we're talking like 2040 to 2050 kind of time frame. Just you all put together some greenhouse gas inventories for your operations. And it will be interesting to see how different or similar they are to the state as a whole. So the state as a whole, about a third of emissions from the built environment, buildings, a little less than a third from transportation, the grid, 13%, and so forth. In a lot of communities, this is kind of typical, especially a more rural, like a county level community, because the agriculture is so high. A community that doesn't have a lot of agriculture, maybe more towards the industry side, etc. I do want to call out something that Mary had mention, the distinction is the work we do together is focused on government operations, so not the whole community. And we'll look at some differences for what that means. There are advantages to starting with this government operations approach. They definitely complement each other, or the government operations can serve as your foundation to then move on to a community-wide approach, because you learn a lot. You set an example for what the local government's doing, and then the emissions that you're accounting for in a local government are a slice of the pie, community-wide. So you get that head start to start to think about community. Other good news. So see, it's not all bad news. The story is we are in an unprecedented moment for climate leadership in our country. Snapshot of what the infrastructure bill, this is a bipartisan bill passed last year, is offering tons and tons of this money, billions of dollars going to climate actions. Meanwhile, there's the EECBG you may hear about, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grants. There's the Inflation Reduction Act. All of these pieces of legislation are funded and offer a pathway for your communities to access funding for the climate action plan. It all starts with having a plan. Not too many governments will just give money when there's not a plan or a strategy in place that shows the emissions reduction from various actions. So this CAFE experience, in 16 months from now, you will have a plan to submit to for EECBG funding. A lot of that will flow through NYSERDA. I know all of you are very used to engaging with NYSERDA. I recommend you get in touch with your rep there today and say, hey, what about this EECBG funding? Because that's going to start to be rolled out this next month. And it's kind of a first come, first served, basis of people who've engaged with their energy office. But all those other bills we talked about, there's ways to fund the strategies you'll put together. This is a similar map, but not the same thing. These are not ICLEI members. These are cities and towns that have published a climate action plan, or a greenhouse gas inventory, or a vulnerability assessment, some kind of climate strategy. Again, you can see the Hudson Valley struck high concentration. The other ones are like Washington, D.C. Those are really well-resourced big cities. So just to show the leadership, and that some of your communities, this isn't your first round of doing this kind of work. In all cases, we follow a really step-by-step process, which is good, because if climate touches everything in our lives, and climate action plan means all those things that we popped up on the screen, it can feel busy or messy, or where to begin. When actually there's a very clear step-by-step process. And that's what CAFE is all about, is to make this a standardized approach we all can walk through together. In any case, it begins with committing and mobilizing, showing leadership. And you all check, here you can put the check in the box. You're doing that. Leadership comes from a number of places. It can be a city council or a mayor, but just as importantly from resident advocates, from volunteer committees and task forces. You all know those very well. No need to read through this. You'll get the kind of steps broken down for you, but in short, the process begins with assessing your baselines, knowing where your community is today on climate action. And that has a number of pillars. Let's call them pillars. So mitigation. What are the sources of greenhouse gas emissions in your community today or in your government operations? Adaptation. How vulnerable is your community today? How vulnerable will it be in 5 years, 20 years, etc.? And then equity. And there are not such standard approaches to measuring the level of equity that is currently, a baseline in your community. But cities and towns are starting to define, indicators, and we can talk about that sort of thing. So those three things taken together are your pillars of climate mitigation, adaptation, and equity. Kathy, for all of us, will focus on mitigation, how to identify and then lower emissions. Some communities will also be following an adaptation track, and then the equity is addressed in both. Equity is kind of a central thread through the work we do in climate. Here's a typical greenhouse gas emissions inventory for a government operations, just so you can see the sectors. This community, kind of typical with New York, up here in the upper left is buildings and facilities, about a third. We see that a lot. Something a little different is this water, they're calling it water renewal, but it can be like wastewater treatment, water delivery. So this city's operations must have had a massive, wastewater treatment plant. Maybe it's even serving a few communities. Vehicle fleet, solid waste, employee commute, and street lights make up the rest. And so those are the sectors. You all have some of your data already. There may be some more sectors to collect for, but a complete set, of cards, you want to collect them all. Those are the sectors that you are going to be collecting your data for. And the kind of proportions of the pie tell a climate story. It's really easy, and actually the state of practice for too long just thought of a greenhouse gas inventory as like a data collection exercise. Kind of boring, kind of pretty dull. Make a report, and then it gets filed away somewhere as a checkbox. Actually, a greenhouse gas inventory is the beginning chapters of your community climate story. It is the characterization of how emissions are today, and then you can also bring in those elements about vulnerability and equity, and then set that course of thinking, where do we go from here? Where does it fit in our region's climate story in the world? So it's good when we'll have a whole session about climate communications, and it's really helpful to bring in more of your community members by like relaying the emissions inventory as a story. So we'll talk a lot more about that. You'll hear this this kind of technical term called scopes. Scope 1, 2, and 3. When we think about sources of greenhouse gas emissions, we group them into scopes. I know not everyone in the room here is going to do a greenhouse gas inventory. You may not be in the data team. That's totally fine. This is good information for you to understand the kind of state of practice, how people who do inventories put them all together. All greenhouse gas inventories need to include the sectors in scope 1. So when you'll sometimes hear it called protocol compliance, because there are standards for how this work is done. They're called protocols. There's a local government operations greenhouse gas inventory protocol, and it requires scope 1, number 1, like most important, these things like vehicles in your fleet, energy that your facilities are using. Fugitive emissions refers to refrigerants for the most part, and then also natural gas, like pipelines have a leakage rate, and they're not completely sealed and tight, so you want to account for that kind of thing. All of this is scope 1. It's like the energy your operation is using directly. You also want to include scope 2, which is emissions associated with transmission of energy. Also, you can see purchase electricity. Maybe you have some sort of like power purchase agreement. You're getting your electricity from somewhere else. It has to be transmitted into your community, so you want to account for that in your inventory. Finally, there's a set of scope 3 sectors that should be included in an inventory. We mentioned some of them already. This employee commute, often gathered through a survey or looking at employees like zip codes of where they're commuting from. There's a number of ways to get this. But that's considered scope 3. It's like happening outside of government operations, but still the government is responsible for those emissions. Some communities can collect like business travel. Waste is in here. You lease facilities. Maybe you lease a building and you want to account for the energy in that. The reason they're scope 3, and I kind of pull them out separately, is it's not always easy to get those pieces of data, and they're for that reason not. You can have a protocol compliant inventory, a complete inventory, even if you don't get those things. So you want to try, but don't be sad if you can't. And ICLEI is here to help you. Mary is here to help you have as comprehensive an inventory as you can get. This other stuff, extra credit all the way. We're not even going to focus on it on CAFE. This is like food and other goods maybe that are purchased for government events, where products go at the end of their life, upstream emissions associated like building materials. What's the embedded carbon? You can already see it gets very complicated to do this kind of life cycle assessment. So it's not considered within the protocols. You don't have to do that work. But I do want you to know, like, that's maybe the future. Maybe the future, this is where we're all going, is to do like that super life cycle. Let's see here, I'll just kind of breeze through the other pillars much faster so that you have a sense. Again, not all of you are working on the vulnerability assessment piece, but that is a component of climate planning, understanding your, the top climate hazards that your community is exposed to. Here in the Hudson Valley, heat, we know, many places flood events. River communities, sea level rise will impact that. Even like tick-borne diseases, invasive species. All of these are considered climate hazards that your community may be exposed to. And you want to get kind of like a baseline sense of how bad it is, right? And how bad it's projected to be in the next 20 years, 50 years, that sort of thing. And that's the basis of it, is like, what's projected impact is what are we going to do about it? That's a climate adaptation strategy. A really good one that you can check out, Mary was involved in, is the Hastings-on-Hudson vulnerability assessment. I like it because it's comprehensive and achievable too. It's a small village, mostly volunteers, or all volunteers maybe, that did this work in like fairly short order. It was like under a year, I think, and did a really great job. Involved a lot of community members, etc. That's another just point to call out, is those of you working on the vulnerability assessment, that happens community-wide. Where the rest of us work, we're talking strict government operations. And we'll have plenty of time to get through the different. I want to bring this up on the equity side. Again, this is more of a community-wide kind of consideration, especially down the line if you're getting into community engagement. Many of you maybe have already seen this spectrum of community empowerment. It comes out of this group called the Movement Strategy Center. It does a lot of really good research around what like top-notch community engagement looks like, and essentially looks at a few like focus areas, like activities, money that the government's allocating, community goals, messaging, and encourages or helps your community engagement move from a largely ignore category. You're probably not there, probably not that bad, but all the way to empowering your community members or empowering your task force members. So if you want to give yourself kind of a self-assessment around equity, this is a pretty straightforward way to begin. So that was the assessment stuff. I won't take up too much more time yeah, because that's where we'll begin, and then we'll review what happens next after that here in month 6. But we'll just say after that assessment phase of our work is done, then we'll move into the climate action planning. There are a few best practices around it. I do want to just call them out so they're in our minds. A climate action plan serves as a comprehensive roadmap for specific activities, like SMART goals, right? Like more specific, the activities you put in your climate action plan, the better. Also to get that money from the EDCG and the federal government, so forth. It builds on information in your baseline assessments. It's not coming from nowhere. Carla and Mary called out this ClearPath tool. Some of you will work in it's an ICLEI tool that when you have an inventory in this tool, you then can forecast emissions change over time. You can even say things like, New York's grid is getting X% cleaner per year. So let's layer that assumption. My town's population is growing by 5% per year. Happening a lot in towns. Layer that up. From there, you can then add your actions in. You want to add a mile of bike lane. You want to run a weatherization program in a neighborhood. You model the emissions reduction on top of that forecast, right? And you want to ratchet it down. So all of this happens in a tool. You don't have to do any of these calculations, from scratch or do your research for it, which is great. And then it allows you to prioritize. You can see is the compost program where you want to put the money and time, or is it more EV chargers in public places? All of those, who knows the answer to those questions? You actually have to do the modeling, and then an implementation strategy comes out of it. So I'll end with just showing you a recipe for a really successful climate action plan. And when I say successful, it's that it can be implemented. It can actually turn into the actions happen. You all know, so many climate action plans around the country never went there. And I like to think of it as who, what, where, when, why, how. That's how you know you got a ready to implement climate action plan. So the who and the what. Which agencies, which partners are responsible for that action. You can see different agencies or departments. Also, the what, what levers need to be pulled, right? Is this a city law or a code issue that would help you move that action forward? Does it involve education? Is it city government can do it by itself, or you need community partners? That's a huge one to think through, and so forth. That's a short list. Then the when is a short-term, medium, or long-term. About how many years would it take to do the action? The why. This is a huge part of CAPI is answering the why for each action. What's the carbon reduction potential for each action? Also part of the why, what are the co-benefits? Emissions reduction is only one thing, of course, to care about. There's health, there's biodiversity, there's giving education opportunities, there's involving youth, there's lots of reasons to do any of these actions, and they need to be accounted for in the plan to make that case. Then you model it all out. You put all your actions together, and this is what I was talking about with that trajectory that you're ratcheting down. This is King County, Washington. I just had to pull an example, and they wanted to strengthen their building. So that orange chunk, taken out. They wanted to reduce the energy use in buildings and industry, so an energy efficiency measure, protect, let's see what else to do, reducing car trips, increasing EVs, phasing out refrigerants, hydrofluorocarbons. So all of this stuff together, they did all the modeling, and that's why they chose that list. Some of them are kind of wonky, right? But it is King County in Washington, and they have lots of money and lots of industry and stuff like that. Your list will be things that you have prioritized for yourself. The bike lanes are not in here, they might be within here. So taken together, then you have your who, what, where, when, why, how. This is Milwaukee, Oregon's climate action plan. Who knew there was Milwaukee, Oregon? There is. And they did a great job of just making this scheme, what would it be called? A diagram for all of their actions. This is like land use, transportation actions, and they have what, 4 things. And you can see they're not getting super detailed. They're not assigning a dollar amount. They're saying this is $4 signs. So it's an expensive action. They're saying, medium time frame. I think they called that like 5 to 8 years or something. So like minimally, you like can set it up like this, of kind of relative values. And then if you can get more specific, that's super. So that's a preview of the work we're going to embark on together over the next 16 months. I hope it's exciting. I love it, and I find it to be really more fun as a team. You'll work with me a lot. I'll be the kind of project lead on this kind of technical stuff, and then I'm supported by Carolyn on our team, who you probably won't meet in person, but you'll interact with Carolyn on Zoom calls, and she's really your help desk. And she knows that. And if you run into any issues with this modeling work or whatever, you can call Carolyn up, and we'll be here to help you each step of the way.
You did such a fabulous job talking about mitigation, and that's, of course, why we're all here to lower greenhouse gas emissions. And it has traditionally been sort of the bedrock of doing climate action plan, but I have seen this movement to include more adaptation work in a climate action plan. And I know it's optional from a climate smart communities perspective, and you don't always see it in the climate action plan, but you see it more and more. And I'm wondering if you can comment on that from sort of your national perspective. Is that a growing trend? And if so, is that the future of climate action plans?
Yeah, that is a trend, a quickly growing trend. So 3 years ago, 12% of climate action plans had an adaptation component. 2 years ago, it was 30%. Today, it's more like 50%, maybe more, actually. And that is just solely because every year that goes by, there's more and more impacts that we feel them each summer and all the other times too. So it's become kind of a standard to look at adaptation side by side. Just a recognition climate change is here today. It's not something towards 2050. Yeah, so, but I guess I would say, not every community in here is looking at adaptation in part of CAPI. That's okay. This is meant to give you this baseline understanding and a path to move forward so that you can plan for a vulnerability assessment in month 17 and 18. And Hudson Valley Regional Council has amazing resources and team to help you do those next steps. So toward the end of CAPI, we'll do meet with each of you and can put together a little like a roadmap for where you'll go from here. And that, yeah, maybe something we should do.
Okay, thank you.
Can you, Kel, can you share your deck either by email or post it on the website? I'm not agreeing.
Yeah, you'll get everything the whole time.
Yeah, so Kel's presentation and my presentation will be posted to the CAPI, and that will be true for every meeting. Each presentation will be posted to this. Different.
As well as the recording. So if anybody needs to listen back, it will be on various focus group websites that are private, just to all of the who are participating.
Any other questions?
You mentioned bike paths. Like, are we looking at our municipal streets paving and like the emissions associated with green?
Yep, yeah, if that would be part of the municipal expenditure, then that is fair game to be looking at that.
you won't look at the emissions associated with paving the streets. The transportation sector just looks at VMT, vehicle miles traveled for the most part. But you could model actions like what emission reduction if not paving or something like that. You could reduce
green concrete as an alternative, and we measure the impact of moving to green concrete as it account. So I might, I know that something I just want to say that while we don't have a start date yet, we will be reaching out to you soon about that. And hopefully, it will get underway in the next month or so. But that process will run in parallel to the mitigation process. So there'll be separate meetings for adaptation, and those will be in conjunction with the Westchester proposal. So there's only, I think, about half of you are involved with the optional adaptation component, and again, those meetings will be with Westchester County, and there'll be separate meetings, but of course, you're always welcome to come to the mitigation meetings as well, and also to the they'll probably like this meeting, these meetings be a combination of in-person and virtual. Well, we'll have to work on it with that TV. That's probably why the majority of them will be virtual.
We'd like to have an in-person kickoff, like this, because it will be a completely different scope. It will be a combination of folks experienced at Dutchess and folks at Dutchess. So it would be great for you all to meet each other. And then where there's a meeting that absolutely seems like really vital to have in person, we'll have it in person. Otherwise, it will stick to most likely virtual given travel and this work kind of lends itself for virtual work. So I believe that's the case. But I really encourage everybody to, to lean on each other and ask questions. Mary's going to go into a whole bunch of other stuff that will give you a sense of how the different opportunities for communicating, getting answers, getting technical assistance. We feel like we
Yeah, no, I have. I just, given we have a lesson and maybe just review the homework again, I think, there's a lot of information today, and I hope a lot of you will come away with, a good sense of the overall project, but, just kind of get down to brass tacks in terms of next steps. I think, as I covered in my presentation, but I'll just go over it one more time. If you could first just finalize your teams, just make sure that you do have the resources you need. I think there are a few of you who are still looking for additional resources. I did want to introduce our intern from Vassar College, who will be helping with the town of Amelia. She unfortunately is not on anymore, but she was earlier. She's excited to help out with Amelia, and then we have Jamie McDonald, who's also joining us. He has come through the EE program, and he's going to be helping with the town of Rhinebeck. So we've brought in some people who I think will be helpful. I know in Hastings we did a couple of mayor messages to try and get new volunteers, and we canvassed at farmers markets, etc., to try and get new volunteers. But it's sometimes can be a heavy lift to bring people in. So we appreciate your focus on that, because I think, especially when we get into the climate action plan work, there's going to be more of a need for volunteers. Maybe not so much in the inventory, but definitely when we get to the climate action plan. There is this community engagement component, so it's important to have people who we know maybe to present to the senior council or to the youth council, or set up meetings with various stakeholder groups and really involve their feedback and implement their ideas into the plan. And then the second area to focus on between now and the next meeting, which, as I mentioned, is Wednesday, February 15th. And by the way, the next meeting will probably be virtual, so you can, we'll send out more information on that, but having it remote hopefully will mean we'll have a bit more participation. So the second area is the electricity and the natural gas account. So as I mentioned, we have uploaded that data, but what really needs to happen now is for you all who know your municipalities better than I do, to really go in and look at the accounts that you have data for. And we've received data for 2018 and 2019. We plan to use 2019 as the base year unless there's any issue with that in terms of reporting, but we wanted to get a pre-pandemic year, but one that wasn't too far out to use as a base year. So that's what we'll be using with the exception of the city of Beacon, which has a little bit of consideration because they've already done an inventory for that year. So they'll be doing a different year, but everyone else will choose the same base year, hopefully, and then we can compare data. But making sure that all the accounts are there is going to be important. I requested the information from Central Hudson based on the account numbers you gave me, and they have given information back, but sometimes those accounts don't line up with the addresses that you've given me. So it's a matter of figuring out, okay, exactly what is this account for, especially some of the lighting accounts, which sometimes the meters can be a little bit tricky because they're not in the exact location of the account that is listed, the address of the account that is listed. So you can go in there and look at the accounts and just make sure that they make sense to you and that they line up with your bills that you're getting from Central Hudson. That would be very helpful. And bring your questions next week to office hours. We can start discussing it then, or we can meet separately to go over that. And if you feel that that's where it should be, that data is right, and you're ready to move on, feel free to talk to me about next steps. We have a checklist of all the data that will be needed, and you can start on that data. And some of that data will be easier to get than others. Propane, fuel oil. You talked about the wastewater treatment plant if you have one, and how to get data from that. So we can work with you if you again want to move forward with some of those checklist items. And lastly, the project template, the project plan template. So again, now you have an overview of kind of where we're going and the different quarters, and if you can customize it, I think that would help you kind of really think through what it is you want to accomplish in these 4 months and who will be doing what and how long each of those tasks will take. And then based on that, you can set up either bi-weekly meetings or once a month meetings. But I do recommend you meet again as a group, or you meet as a group prior to our next meeting in February. February 15th. So hopefully your team will have a chance to meet before that and work out some of these roles and responsibilities and go over the plan, the budget plan, as well as figure out who's going to be doing which role, who's going to be specifically looking at the data, because that's going to be an important job in the next few months. Right, I think that's it. Anyone have any questions? Oh,
I have a question. This is regarding additional resources. So just curious as to if you're kind of thinking that, this might be, a model project and stuff like that. Have there been any consideration to reaching out to like Marist or Vassar or Dutchess or Bard? Because I think some of the schools have environmental programs now, to get an intern per per the different townships, and get a person assigned to each township. Just wondering if that's been.
Yeah, no, it is a great idea, and we have actually done it, and that's why, well, not for everyone, but we've done what we could for this semester. We did reach out to all of them that you mentioned. We do have a representative from Mars. Then we have someone Jamie, who's working with kind of running back, who's just been brought on for Kathy, and also a woman named Julia, who comes from the Vassar Center for Engaged Learning, but also is the biology major in Pacific Leadership and Parental Issues, and she is going to be helping with kind of those were municipalities that we pinpointed as having a gap in their resources.
Okay.
So that's why we focused on those, but
But we did, Mary, I would say, it, I'm terrible with saying, so I'm gonna get it wrong, probably yeoman's work, is that the right saying? In, trying, to get as many interns as possible, she contacted all of the local, universities, and it was a little bit more challenging than we anticipated, frankly. So, I was thinking exactly what you were thinking, let's get every single community an intern.
Right.
But there weren't enough interns.
What about like high school juniors and seniors?
Well, they have to be pretty, that, you should think about that. And I think that that comes with its own challenges in terms of getting the right people to do the right thing. The last thing you want is your data to be incorrect or inputted incorrectly. So I think that's pretty much why you feel more comfortable working with, college. Being able to theoretically correct. But if you know of an amazing high school student that you think would support this, definitely we welcome you to bring them on, and we can provide the guidance to help them help with us.
Okay.
well, I wanted to thank Cornell Cooperative again, Caroline and Kelsey, thank you so much for the space and for having us, and Devin and Jen, and of course Carla, and all of you for coming. So thank you, and we'll see you again on February 15th.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And you haven't had a bagel? You might have a bagel. Oh, yes, and as Devin said, please feel free to mingle for the next half hour or so. And coffee, and thank you.